Okay, I will go ahead and get started here. It's just after 5:30. I'm sure we will have some people joining in the next few minutes, but I will go ahead and start us. Aloha and welcome to Maui Nui Marine Resource Council's monthly Know Your Ocean speaker series. My name is Jill Wirt, and I will be your MC for tonight. I am a project manager with Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. Tonight's webinar is featuring the expansion of the U.S. Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, honoring cultural and biological legacies with Dr. Alan Friedlander. Maui Nui Marine Resource Council is celebrating 15 years of working for clean ocean water, healthy coral reefs, and abundant native fish. Our work wouldn't be possible without the support of viewers like you. Tonight's presentation is part of Maui Nui Marine Resource Council's monthly Know Your Ocean speaker series, usually held on the first Wednesday of each month at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. So our next speaker series will actually not be until June. This monthly series is supported by the County of Maui. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few announcements from Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. Last year, the dive team deployed 3 Aqualink buoys, pictured here on the bottom left, just offshore of Kalama Park, Olowalu, and Ma'alaya. The buoys transmit live data about water temperature, wind, and wave action, and you can view all of the data from Maui and other buoys around the world in real time at aqualink.org/map. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, scientists from the University of Hawaii, Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and the Division of Aquatic Resources conducted a study which found decreased tourism in Molokini had a positive effect on reef fish. This study was recently published and is now available online, and we want to thank all of our donors and contributors who made this study possible. You can find the study online in the Public Library of Science peer-reviewed journal. You can support continued water quality monitoring by becoming a trained water quality sampling volunteer with Hui Panalāʻau. This community-based water quality monitoring program, launched and conducted by Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, the Nature Conservancy, and West Maui Ridge to Reef Initiative, in partnership with the State of Hawaii Department of Health Clean Water Branch, tests ocean water quality every 3 weeks at 29 locations in South and West Maui. If you're a Maui resident looking for more volunteer opportunities, this program always seeks reliable West and South Maui volunteers. You can visit huiokavaiola.com for more information. You can also support Hui Panalāʻau through their Brown Water Watch program. Maui's nearshore waters are increasingly being spoiled by storm events, leaving them a muddy brown. Hui Panalāʻau needs your help to capture these events through photos and videos. Photos provided by the community will be combined with the images from the Hui to identify sediment hotspots and areas where water quality needs improvement. You can share your brownwater photos at brownwaterwatch@gmail.com. Please include the photo date, location, and any interesting observations that you'd like to share. You can follow Brownwater Watch on Instagram at brownwaterwatch. And now for tonight's presentation. We will leave time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions, and we invite you to submit your questions by using the Q&A button on the lower edge of your screen. This presentation is being recorded and streamed to Facebook Live and will be available on our YouTube and Facebook profiles. So now for our speaker presenter, Dr. Alan Friedlander. He has spent over 12,000 hours underwater over the past 40 years, from coral reefs to the poles and to depths of thousands of meters. Dr. Friedlander is chief scientist for the National Geographic Society's Pristine Seas program and a researcher at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology at the University of Hawaii. He leads research efforts to help understand and conserve iconic special places in the ocean and is an expert in marine ecology, fisheries, and conservation. His work on marine protected areas ranges from small, locally community-managed areas to some of the largest protected areas on the planet. You might recognize Dr. Friedlander, who has spoken with us before, as he was part of that Molokini tourism study in 2020. So we're thrilled to have him back. Thank you so much for being here. I will let you take it from here.
Okay, All good, everybody? Can you see that? Jill, give me a thumbs up.
Yep, we don't see the full screen view. Just, oh, there we go. All
Okay.
good now. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, great. Thanks for the introduction, and aloha, everyone. Good to see you this evening. I can't really see you, but anyway, so today I want to talk about the expansion of the Pacific remote islands, places that I know pretty well, spent a lot of time there. So there are these, they consist of Wake and Johnson, Howland and Baker, Kingman, Palmyra, and Jarvis. These far-flung places are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, mostly uninhabited. Wake, Johnson, and Jarvis are fully protected now. They were all protected by President Bush in 2000 and by G.W. Bush, and then expanded by President Obama. Unfortunately, now Howland and Baker and Kingman and Palmyra only are protected out to 50 nautical miles. So what we're hoping is that they get fully expanded and protected in a national marine sanctuary, and I'll talk more about that now. So the reason that most of these islands are under U.S. possession is in 1856, the U.S. Guano Act basically said that all enabled any U.S. citizen to take possession in the name of the United States of unclaimed island that contained guano deposits. Many of these islands in the Central Pacific had extensive bird colonies and thus lots of bird poop and guano. This was backbreaking work. Lots of slavery was involved in it, human rights and so forth, which wasn't a thing back then. But this was white gold. This really accelerated U.S. agriculture in the latter part of the 1800s. So mining this guano was incredibly lucrative at the time. And these islands, they're not much to the islands themselves. Howland and Baker are these two low-lying coral islands in the middle of the Central Pacific. Jarvis is the only island that's in the southern hemisphere, just south of the equator. And Kingman Reef is really not emergent land at all. The only places where there is some human habitation, Johnson Atoll formerly was a U.S. military installation. They did a lot of chemical burning there in the 60s, 70s, and 80s up until when it closed in the 90s. A lot of the Agent Orange from Vietnam got burned at Johnston, unfortunately. And then Wake Atoll currently has a military presence there of about 150 people, which was formerly part of the Marshall Islands. And then finally, Palmyra Atoll, which I will go into greater detail in a little bit. Okay, so despite these places are uninhabited or were uninhabited in the past and far-flung, they were really important stopovers for both Polynesian and Micronesian explorers during their trans-Pacific journey. So just because they're not peopled or weren't peopled doesn't mean they weren't important or are important to this day to people. So Papaʻnaumukuakea in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands is really the only still pristine cultural voyaging seascape that exists anywhere. And Hokulea shown here up in Mokumanamana, but by expanding and protecting the Pacific remote islands even more so, that will expand the ability to do more cultural seascape voyaging throughout the Central Pacific region. In 1935, there was a secret U.S. operation to colonize the islands of Howland, Baker, and Jarvis. 130 young men, mainly Hawaiian from Kamehameha schools, colonized these areas. They spent 3 to 4 month stints there at a time. And this was to try to prevent Japanese encroachment coming across the Pacific during the 1930s up into the lead up into World War II. So they stayed there from the late 30s during the war. And the Bishop Museum had an exhibit in 2002 where a lot of the remaining members of the Hui Panalāʻau were there and I got a chance to talk to them, and they had some incredible stories about what it was like to live on these remote islands for 3 and 4 months at a time. It's really, and we owe a lot of, to their service. A lot of these Pacific Islands wouldn't be part of the U.S. today if it wasn't for the Hui Panalāʻau. Okay, in 2002, we published this document the expansion of the Pacific Remote Islands. And this was the rationale for the cultural and biological importance of these places. It was a multi-authored paper with a number of scientists and cultural practitioners, and we laid out the rationale for why this should be expanded. And these nearly pristine places are highly interconnected. The coral reefs out to the deep sea and everything in between. Seabirds are a great connector. They're the ones who are going offshore and feeding, coming back, depositing their poo on land, which enriches the nearshore marine environment. You can see that bottom figure there. The groupers are getting most of their energy from this planktonic production. Sharks are moving in and out, moving energy from one part of the ecosystem to the other. These deep sea mounts that exist throughout the region also bring up a lot of nutrient-rich water. So the point about this is this whole ecosystem is interconnected, and I'll get into that from here on in. These coral reefs in the Central Pacific are the jewels in the crown. These are some of the most intact, nearly pristine coral reef ecosystems left on the planet. There's no people there to disturb these ecosystems for the most part, and they really thrive in high biodiversity. The three-dimensional structure created by some of these amazing coral formations just create all the habitat that's necessary to see the diversity of life that we see. Now, it's not as diverse as you move in, Indonesia, the Philippines, places like that, but the systems are highly intact and really healthy. And even these small digitate corals harbor myriad little cryptic species. And so the whole ecosystem is connected, and the health of all the components of each component of the ecosystem, it really affects the entire ecosystem as a whole. Also huge old growth coral colonies. This is equivalent to old growth redwood forests. Some of you may know Jen Smith, a researcher from Scripps Institute of Oceanography, who spent a lot of time in Maui working, and that big lobe coral in the background there, back of her, is several hundred years old. So these represent really old growth development, and if they're lost, it takes a long time to regenerate them. Giant clams, this is an image from Kingman Reef. The reef flats there are just littered with just giant clams. They cover all of the available occupied space. And giant clams, that mantle there has this little symbiotic algae in them, just like in corals. And so they photosynthesize, which allows them to grow much more effectively. And the mantles are all beautiful and different. And unfortunately, giant clams are very delicious as well. And so they've been removed from many places throughout the Pacific where there are lots of people. Having these places in the remote Pacific Islands where there are no people, there's no harvesting of clams and other species, allow these systems to thrive in its natural state as possible. And this is the result of that, just these beautiful flats full of clams. And then charismatic megafauna, species like these oceanic mantas here. And they're another great connector species. They're feeding offshore on plankton, and then they're coming back in over the reef. And so they're moving energy from one, seemingly hundreds of kilometers away from one spot to the next. So this interconnectivity is important to maintain, and that's what makes the ecosystem as healthy as it is. And there's no fishing in these places, right? So in the absence of fishing, we just see huge schools of fish, like this big school of opelu here, but also the red snappers. Some of these large predators here are what typifies these reefs in the Central Pacific, in the Pacific Remote Islands, but aren't very common anymore in places where there are people. And these predators exert a really strong top-down control on the ecosystem. We've seen this in several places where the biomass pyramid is actually inverted, where you have more predators than prey. And excuse me. And so these predators just cause the prey species to live fast and die young and recycle all the energy really quickly. And that's what leads to a greater amount of resilience in these ecosystems. So this is what a coral reef ecosystem is supposed to look like. But we quickly remove these species from the ecosystems. And so we don't really have the opportunity to understand and study what natural systems look like. The Pacific Remote Islands gives us that baseline. It's a window into the past of what systems look like without people. And it allows us to figure out how to more effectively manage places where there are people. And the star of the show is the sharks. The Pacific Remote Islands has some of the highest densities of sharks that we'll see anywhere. And why is this important? Shark populations have been decimated globally, declined by 90% or more in most places. Where there are people, you just don't see a lot of sharks. And like the other predators, these are really important to keeping the reef and the whole ecosystem healthy. They take care of the sick, the weak. Again, they cause the system to operate at a much more efficient and effective level. So when sharks are removed from the system, things quickly get out of balance. You get invasions of species, you get proliferations of species that wouldn't normally be overly abundant, but in the absence of the sharks, they do become abundant. So sharks are critical to these ecosystems, and they're extremely abundant there. And this kind of shows how this looks in graphical form. This is some data from NOAA, from Ivor Williams years ago. And this looks at fish biomass across all of the US Pacific. So these are proportional bubbles. The bigger the bubble, the greater the biomass. And the red portion of the bubbles represent large predators. So these are sharks and jacks and groupers and the things that are driving that top-down control of the ecosystem. And we can see here that places like Jarvis and Palmyra and Kingman and Howland and Baker and Wake have some of the highest biomass we see anywhere in the Pacific region. Likewise, we see similar in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, especially compared to the main Hawaiian Islands, where these large predators have been extirpated or removed. Okay, so it's not just about the fish. As we go on to land, we see that even though land is relatively limited in these small islands and atolls, they're incredibly important for seabirds. There's 16 species of seabirds that nest in the Pacific Remote Islands, and there's 40 species in total that are found in the surrounding waters. Sooty tern colonies at Palmyra is in the order of 750,000. When you're in Palmyra, when all the sooty terns are nesting, it's just this cacophony of noise. You can't even hear yourself talk. It's just impressive to see that much wildlife there in one place. And you can imagine all these places were like that at one point in the past. Likewise, Howland Island has 150,000 sooty terns there. And at Palmyra Atoll, it's the largest colony of black noddies found in the Pacific region. And likewise, the red-footed booby that you see down there in the bottom right, Palmyra has the second largest breeding colonies of red-footed boobies found anywhere in the world. Fairy terns there as well. And just the whole place, these were seabird refuges. That's why they were all mined for guano in the past, because the bird poop was like white gold, and they're there for tens of thousands of years, just defecating, creating this huge layer of guano that trickled off into the marine environment and helped the productivity of that system as well. So seabirds are predators, right? They're oceanic predators. They go out, they're feeding out to sea. They can go tens, if not hundreds of kilometers away to forage. And they really rely on a healthy marine environment to exist. So there's that tight connection or coupling between the seabirds and the fish that are driving up the bait fish. So as we see here, here's a huge school of big ahi. And these ahi are driving the bait to the surface. And you can see the birds in the background. So if you don't have both the ahi driving the bait fish up and the birds driving the bait fish down, neither of them is as an effective as a predator as they would be if they're both present. So the birds need the tuna and the tuna need the birds to have a healthy, intact ecosystem. It's also an important place for a lot of marine mammals. There are greater than 21 species of marine mammals found around this area. There's some of the common ones include bottlenose dolphins, melonhead whales seem to be fairly resident around Palmyra. And then you have rare species like this beaked whale. The Central Pacific region that we're talking about used to be one of the most productive areas in the world for sperm whales. They're not found there very commonly anymore, but who knows, maybe with increased protection and prohibition in whaling elsewhere around the world, that they'll come back and this will one day be a productive area for sperm whales again. Okay, I said I was going to talk about Palmyra Atoll, and now I am. So this is a declassified image of Palmyra Atoll from the late 1930s. Now, this is what it looked like. Palmyra Atoll was annexed by King Kamehameha IV in the late 1800s, and then it changed hands a number of times. It ended up Judge Cooper in the 1920s owned it. The US military took it over in 1939 to create a military base there for the onset of World War II. They did a lot of dredging and filling, creating airstrips, and several thousand military personnel were there during World War II up until the late 1940s. The Ford Leo family who owned it, they were from Kailua, Hawaii, and they actually had to go to the US Supreme Court to wrestle it back from the US military. Anyway, this is Palmyra then. You notice the lagoons and how it is. And this is Palmyra today. You can see the airstrip right there. There's all these causeways you see, and there's a lot more landfill, and the lagoons are connected now. You can see this big channel that is artificial that was created. So there have been a lot of replumbing and re-engineering that took place. Never underestimate the capabilities of a bunch of 18-year-old kids with dynamite. So there was a lot of changes that took place in Palmyra. Fortunately, the marine environment is still incredible there. And this is kind of the sequence of events for Palmyra. It was purchased by the Nature Conservancy in 2000. There was talks of a nuclear dump site, a casino, all kinds of things. The family wanted to sell, and to Nature Conservancy's credit, they recognized what a valuable asset this was, and they purchased it. It became a national wildlife refuge in 2001. Fish and Wildlife got access to a lot of the islets and some of the acreage. And then it got incorporated into the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii's chapter. And then there was a lot of research that went on. Starting in 2005, the Palmyra Atoll Research Consortium, with over 200 publications at this point. They did all kinds of amazing work. And then in 2009, President Bush declared the Pacific Remote Islands National Monument at, whatever that is. It's, I think, 750,000 square kilometers. And then there was rat eradication. And now there's a climate resilience lab at Palmyra I'll get into a little bit more. And this is where we are today. Okay, I first started working at Palmyra in 2001, soon after the Nature Conservancy bought it. There was questions about the sustainability of a catch and release bonefish or Leo fishing in Palmyra. Some wealthy donors had wanted to go down to Palmyra to bonefish. It was a national wildlife refuge. So we're looking at the capabilities or the carrying capacity or sustainability of that. This was the old yacht club, which was the lab at the time. There's been a lot of upgrades since then, but we were there on the ground floor when Palmyra we did the first research programs at Palmyra. So it was pretty exciting to be there and see what was going on. We tagged a lot of bonefish, and we weren't getting many bonefish back. So it was a bit of an enigma. We'd done a lot of bonefish research in Hawaii and elsewhere around the world. So why was Palmyra so different? Because of these fellows and ladies. There's just so many sharks at Palmyra. that it was impossible to do much in the way of bonefish work anymore. So if you can't beat them, join them. So we started an active program working on sharks. You can see there's all kinds of small juvenile black tips are there. We did acoustic telemetry on sharks, doing some surgery there, Jen Cassell. And, you know, we were looking at their movement patterns, but being able to study sharks in a natural environment at natural densities is an unprecedented thing. Palmyra is the only research laboratory that sits on a pristine coral reef ecosystem. So these opportunities to examine and explore and understand natural systems don't exist anywhere else on Earth. Palmyra is also unique. These are Pisonia trees. They're fairly soft wood deciduous trees. They were found throughout the Pacific region before, but they were immediately cut down, put up coconut palms. Coconut palms are much more utilitarian. You can eat them, you can thatch your roof with them, you can build your canoes. But, you know, they're really important bird nesting habitats as well. Palmyra is a little anomalous. It's a wet atoll, so it sits in the intertropical convergence, so it gets 200 inches of rain a year. So it's very lush, but a lot of the Pisonia were removed and coconut plantations were put in. Fortunately, that is being reverted now, and I'll get into that in a sec. Also, abundant coconut crabs. This is the world's largest land arthropod, and unfortunately, they're delicious as well. So any place where there's people, you just don't find a lot of coconut crabs, but because of the way Palmyra is, coconut crab populations are just booming. Previously, I mentioned the Palmyra Atoll Research Consortium, or PARC, and it was started in 2005. And it was a collaborative of a bunch of universities, agencies, nature conservancies, museums, conservation organizations, and they did amazing research, hundreds of publications. And again, the ability to study a pristine coral reef ecosystem is unprecedented. So having this consortium on the atoll and being able to do the kind of research that was done there was unprecedented and really groundbreaking. And so now the Nature Conservancy is leading this climate adaptation and resilience laboratory, and it's looking at multiple components. Why are coral reefs resilient in these places where there's no people? There's no anthropogenic or human impacts. So how is the system responding to that? Why are other reefs dying while these reefs are living? And then how is that affecting the land and vice versa? Palmyra had, these huge Pisonia forests with forest birds or seabirds and coconut crabs everywhere. Then coconut plantations were put up. And then how does this all connect to the pelagic environment? So these are questions that can't be answered in a lot of other places, but they can be answered at Palmyra. So they put up coconut palms in Palmyra way back in the day, and they dominate the whole place. Amazingly, Nature Conservancy with volunteers and others have removed over 1 million coconut palms, and the Pisonia are coming back now. And this is what the system is hoping to look like in the future, where on the left there, you see coconut palm dominated island with organic carbon being put in. The reefs are not as healthy and not as luxurious. Pisonia come back, you get more birds, you get more crabs, there's more of a healthy input of nutrients into the marine environment, and then the balance of that ecosystem is put back in place. As part of this work, the Blue Water Research Program was started. This is a consortium with Nature Conservancy, USGS, a number of institutes where we've all been involved in that. So we just did a massive tagging effort of a number of different species, birds and whales and tuna and sharks, and we still are finding the results on that. But the paper that we have just published on that looks at the average ranges for these species that were recorded in the literature. And you can see that red box there in the middle is the 50 nautical miles. And that's good for some of the species like bottlenose dolphins and the green sea turtles and the gray reef sharks. But then like the frigate birds and the boobies, and particularly the tuna and the terns, they can go far distances away. So expanding the monument to out to 200 miles is going to be very beneficial for these species. These islands are littered with seamounts. The current areas, have seamounts in them, but there's a huge number of seamounts that are outside the current levels of protection. And these seamounts are really important for a number of reasons. These are biodiversity hotspots. These are like little oases in the middle of nowhere. They create their own ecosystems. Deep nutrient-rich water is upwelled or evected up towards the surface, and you get all kinds of mixing and nutrients there, pelagic species. They're also isolated, so you get a lot of endemic species. Species are found nowhere else except on those seamounts, and so these are incredibly important. They're also incredibly fragile. Things are long-lived. Some of the deep water corals are some of the longest living organisms on Earth, several thousand years in some cases. So again, irreplaceable if these are damaged. And recent work in these sanctuaries or in these deep water habitats have found amazing sea life, lots of new species, bunch of species not known to science, species that are endemic just to specific seamounts. So each of them is potentially different. And then species on the deep sea plain that we don't know a lot about. So an incredible, diversity of life. So what are the threats to these places? Fishing. So this is a map of global, or at least for the Pacific, of fishing effort based on automated information system satellite data that's transmitted. And you can see the yellow are where much of the fishing takes place. So a lot of it's in these deep sea pockets outside of national jurisdictions because they don't need permits to fish in there, but a lot inside of countries' jurisdictions as well. Very little of the fishing by the US longline fleet takes place in the Pacific remote islands, less than 5% by last account. So it's not a huge amount of loss to the US Pacific longline fleet if those remaining areas get close to fishing. And the good news about it is recent data from Papahanaumokuakea has shown that for yellowfin tuna, so ahi and big eye, also ahi, the creation, or since the expansion of Papahanaumokuakea in 2016, longline catch has actually increased in the areas outside adjacent to the monument. So those red areas there on the outside for yellowfin, and less so for big eye, but big eye is more valuable, so even more important for them. So creating these big monuments are a benefit to fisheries. It's a little counterintuitive that by locking off this much real estate from fishing, that fishing actually benefits. But this gives fish a refuge. And even though they can move great distances, they don't always do so. And so they can provide huge benefits for even pelagic fish. The other threat is deep sea mining. So this is just coming into play right now. Seamounts have all kinds of things like cobalt and other crust materials that's important for our technology age. Manganese nodules on the deep sea are important for a lot of industrial uses as well. And this level of mechanization would be disastrous for the deep sea. Like I said before, species are long-lived there, slow growing. Once you kill these things, they're almost irreplaceable. The plumes generated from deep sea mining can extend for hundreds of kilometers. So the footprint is far beyond the actual mining activity. And so by protection of these places, that would eliminate deep sea mining threats in the region. And then finally, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, climate change. This is a photo I took at Penguin Spit in Palmyra, I think in 2002 or 3, where all the corals had bleached. And there's been several bleaching events at Palmyra since then. But the reefs seem to recover in the absence of humans. When you've got high numbers of herbivorous fish, and healthy ecosystems that don't have a lot of nutrient inputs, they tend to rebound from these disturbance events like bleaching and warming events. So climate change is happening. Reefs have to adapt. Reefs, in the absence of people or with minimum impact, will adapt much better than other reefs. And so there are a lot of lessons learned from places like Palmyra and elsewhere in the Pacific remote islands that we can help manage our reefs better where there are people. And then finally to the Pacific Island Coalition. So this has been a community-driven effort working to expand the Pacific remote islands. It's a diverse coalition, including kapuna, fishermen, educators, cultural practitioners, nonprofits, community groups, scientists, religious organizations, veterans, and many others across the Pacific. And it's with a collective interest in protecting the cultural, natural, and historical legacy of this special place. So I got the Protect PRI website down there, and this group's been very active for almost a decade now, trying to have a grassroots effort to expand protection for the Pacific remote islands. This is the National Marine Sanctuary nomination document that the Pacific Remote Island Coalition submitted to the National Marine Sanctuary Program in February of 23. And the reason they're going for sanctuary designation is this is going to give clear and comprehensive legal protection. It'll supplement and complement, not supplant, what existing regulations exist there. And it also allows NOAA the ability to develop comprehensive management plans, bring expertise and capacity, and also build on all the great work that they've done at Papaʻanaʻaumokuākea, working with Fish and Wildlife Service. So at the International Marine Protected Area meeting in Vancouver in February, Uncle Saul Kohala gave a copy of the Kumalipo, which is the Hawaiian creation chant, the beginning of which starts about the coral polyps, the genesis of all life. And he gave that to Jane Lubchenco, who's the Deputy Director of Climate and the Environment in the White House, Office of Science and Technology and Policy. And so she's leading the charge for sanctuary designation. We had John Armour, the head of the National Marine Sanctuary Program there, and also people from Fish and Wildlife Service. So this was a great opportunity to engage the government with PRI, the Pacific Island Coalition, on their wants and hopes and desires for expansion of the current existing monument into a sanctuary. And as a result of that, in March 24th, President Biden issued the Memorandum on Conservation of Nature and Culture of the Pacific Remote Islands, and directing the Department of Interior and Department of Commerce to begin the sanctuary designation process. So the coalition has been very active in trying to protect this place. In addition to moving towards sanctuary status, they also want to rename the area to something that's more culturally appropriate, using the process that honors the cultures, traditions, and ancestral significance of the region, much in the way that happened in Papaʻanaʻaumokuākea, also honoring the service and sacrifice and significance of the Hui Panalāʻau, who were there on these islands from 1935 to 1942, and also to create a co-management regime to be able to ensure Indigenous Pacific voices are a voice and part of the decision-making process. So again, the Protect PRI website is on the bottom there for anybody who's interested. There's lots of press material. There's ways to help. Send letters to, congressional delegation, other folks that expressing your, wants and desires to help move this towards sanctuary status as well. And that should do it.
All right. That is incredible. And I love all of your photos and hearing about your experiences from going up there and visiting a lot of these places that some of us probably will never get to experience. So it's great to see it through your lens as well. So we do have time for questions for those that are in our audience. Go ahead and submit any questions in the Q&A box on the lower edge of your screen. If you're viewing through Facebook, you can leave a comment and it will be relayed through here. So yeah, go ahead and ask your questions, but if people need some time to think, I have some as well to start us off. So it's something that you pointed out that, we've recognized the threats to some of these pristine areas, but and they do show resilience. So how do we, what's the biggest thing that you think you've learned from some of these pristine areas, and how do we transfer some of this knowledge or understanding into our environment that's much more urbanized?
Right. So through our project with National Geographic Pristine Seas, I have been very fortunate to visit some of these last remote places in addition to PRI. And they're all kind of blow you away, right? They're all amazing, whether you're in a tropical coral reef or in Antarctica, right? Or in the Russian Arctic being chased by a polar bear. It's all pretty phenomenal, right? But you learn a lot about how ecosystems function. People are certainly part of the ecosystem. We recognize that very well in Hawaii and throughout the Pacific. So it's sort of like where we are on that continuum that we need to figure out, right? We're not gonna, it's not gonna look like Palmyra Atoll. It's not gonna look like Papahanaumokuakea. But you go to Ko'olave, and I tell you, I spent a lot of time in Ko'olave, and it looks a lot more like Papahanaumokuakea than it does, South Maui. And so there are, things that we can do locally, right? Some of these large protected areas, I get it. It's very unpalatable to lock off a huge amount of real estate in Hawaii. It's a crowded space that we have to compete with. But there are efforts, right? So there's community managed areas that have been successful in other, many parts of Hawaii. We have a benefit in Hawaii is we still have a lot of remote areas. In addition to Ko'olave, the North Shore of Molokai around Kalapapa and Momomi, pretty amazing. The Hamakua Coast of Big Island, Ni'ihau. So there are places that are still intact and probably help benefit the rest of the places that are being overexploited. And it's not just overfishing, right? It's overdevelopment. It's land-based pollution, coastal development. It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? So I wish I knew the exact answer. I know, more sensible fisheries management, better land use management and coastal management, right? Everything's Mauka to Makai in Hawaii. So what happens upslope affects things that happen in the ocean. And so we need to have better land use practices as well as just more sensible management. And we should think about putting the brakes on things, right? I mean, how do we develop more of a circular economy and develop a more sustainable footprint? Easy to say, hard to do.
Right. Yeah, that's something that you had mentioned earlier, is just having a more holistic view. It's very easy to point fingers at one specific problem, but it really is a lot of things that contribute to it, and looking at it from a bigger picture, but then also just where can you start chipping away, I guess, and everything's very connected. So thank you for that perspective. We have some questions coming in. What is the most effective way to fight deep sea mining, such as is occurring in the Clarion zone right now?
Clearing Clipperton and fracture zone. Yeah,
Thank you.
I was actually involved in helping to set up the protected areas adjacent to that because, there, like I said, in the past, it was not economically feasible or not technologically feasible or economically viable. And unfortunately, both of those exist now. I think really be careful about this. When that was created, we helped set up some large preservation zones around that accounted for about 1/3 of the area, recognizing the extent of mining plumes and things like that. But these are devastating activities. This is literally mining that, it's not like cutting down trees in the forest that they're going to grow back. Right? Some of these things are hundreds of thousands of years old, hundreds to thousands of years old. And I don't know, I think, like I said, there's a lot of, we need to think more about a circular economy. We can't just keep extracting things from the ocean. And on land. We behave like we have more than one planet. And, we've just passed 8 billion people. It's, one could argue it's not sustainable at that rate. So I understand the need to keep fueling the global economy, but at some point we need to think about at least tapping the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, I think is there ever opportunity to provide testimony against deep sea mining? Is that possible on either local or federal level?
So there's no deep sea mining allowed in Hawaii, to my knowledge.
Right.
It's the International Seabed Authority, which is part of the UN. It's part of the Law of the Sea Convention, which the US is not a signatory to, but they abide by most of the rules and regulations associated with that. It's tough not to crack, right? Because now there's big financial interests at stake, at play, and it's just going to be like the large commercial fishing fleets of China and Taiwan and Korea. And so there's 5 countries that fish the high seas that make the most money. It's China, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and Spain. And those 5 countries account for most of the high seas fisheries. Those high sea fisheries are not about food security for the most part for people. They are about, feeding wealthy European and, continental North American appetites. So one could argue that a lot of those Pacific Island countries would be a lot better. They've done a good job of monetizing the resources. They make a lot more money now than they used to. But again, we have to think about who these resources are benefiting. And that goes with mining and things like that. Everybody should have a say. The planet's shrinking by the day. So I think we all have a voice to be heard.
Right. Thank you. Elenia is asking, when you saw the coral bleaching in 2003, she thinks you said were you able to see how long the coral recovered? With fewer people, the coral recover faster. What is the timeline for that?
I can't speak specifically to Palmyra, but I know we've been working in Kiribati in the Southern Line Islands, and we're heading back there in a couple of weeks. And there was a massive bleaching event in 2015 and 2016 there, and half the corals died. And we went back in 2021, so 4 years later, and there had been complete recovery. The species switched a little bit, right? There was a little bit of moving around chairs, but the overall coral cover was the same as it was 4 years later. So we think corals grow much slower than they actually do. A lot of the coral growth stuff has been experimental in labs and not under natural conditions, and a lot of the work in Palmyra as well. So Stuart Sandin's lab at Scripps has been doing this photogrammetry where they have paired cameras and they go and they just take big swaths and then they're able to stitch it together and kind of develop these 3D models of what the reef looks like and look at really fine scale growth. And they have been able to track these things at Palmyra over time. So yeah, we're talking in the order of, less than a decade. So 4 to 6 years, up. In some cases, maybe longer, and others, what's going to happen is the weedy species take over fast, and then the slow growing, more bully species take a little longer to establish. But it's nothing static, right? It's always changing. These events are, there's some, pretty catastrophic. What happens where we have people is that you have a bleaching event and all the corals die, or a lot of the corals die. And then we've got sedimentation, we've got disease, we've got the lack of herbivorous fish, and all those things just don't allow for the recovery as much.
Right. Yeah, it's different baselines. Thank you. Jacqueline asks, thank you for your presentation. The increase in ahi catch as a result of Papahanaumokuakea is impressive. How is this result being communicated to the public, and what has the response been like?
It's been very contentious, right? So this paper didn't come out that long ago. There was a lot of pushback from the fishing community. hemming and hawing about, trying to poke holes in it. It was an extremely rigorous study. John Lynham from University of Hawaii Economics Department and his lab, Sarah Madoff, I think, was the lead author on it. Anyway, it was really good study. And they had all the data before expansion of the monument, from long line data, from observer data, and then data post expansion of the monument. So it was a pretty clean semi-natural experimental design. And it was pretty compelling, for the ahi. There was huge, like 50% increase in catch of ahi right around near the monument. So I think I would like to see that information get out there a lot more, because it doesn't only work on that big scale, but we see spillover. We did some work up in Pupukea on the North Shore, and fishermen recognize that there's a lot of fish on those boundaries, because the whole point about marine protected areas benefit fisheries in two ways. Via adult spillover, you get a lot of big animals in there, and then they go outside the protected area and they get caught. Or they get big and they make a lot of keiki. And that's actually more beneficial. And so these keiki can, replenish the outlying fished areas as well. But fishermen recognize this. They fish the line. So you always see people outside of Honolulu, just outside of Honolulu or places like that. And so there are benefits, big and small. Not every protected area is going to benefit fisheries. We shouldn't oversell that. I mean, some people do, but they're not always put in the right place. They oftentimes, like most of the MLCDs in the state, were not designed for fisheries. They were designed to protect unique and cool places. So we shouldn't try to make them do something they weren't originally intended to do. Right. Maybe moving forward with Holomua and people thinking about how to effectively manage the marine environment, that we can be more proactive and premeditated about what protected areas look like.
Great. And this is the last question that I have in the Q&A. I didn't notice I noticed you didn't mention the place the octopuses play in the ecosystem. Do they exist in these remote islands?
So, for He'e, they usually come out at night. So we weren't doing a lot of night work. It's not always the greatest idea to be out at night with all the sharks. There's a lot of predation going on, but I think a lot of things on the reefs are there, but you don't see them because of all the predators. So of all the sharks and all the jacks and all the groupers, if you're a prey species, you probably don't want to be out, waving your fins or tentacles around, being obvious. So you see day octopus out, obviously, but I think a lot of species are more cryptic. We certainly see a lot of the fishes hang a lot closer to the reef in places where there's predators than there's prey. So I would imagine there's lots of He'e there, but I haven't really, wasn't a thing that we've been looking at. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, if anyone else has any more questions, I didn't see any come through from Facebook, but this presentation is being recorded and it's on Facebook, so it'll be posted to our Facebook and YouTube pages. If people feel like they have more questions, feel free to use the Q&A. Alan, if you want to type answers, if they do come in, that is totally fine. I'm going to start wrapping us up, but I wanted to say a big thank you. Mahalo for being here and for giving us more of a background on the remote Pacific Islands National Monument, and for all the work that you're doing through Pristine Seas and at UH. So it's great to have you around and also have you local. We're very excited to hear about your future expeditions and hopefully have you back at one of our speaker series in the future. So thank you again. I'll go ahead and wrap us up here. I'm going to just pull something up. There we go. Okay, to everyone here that attended our webinar, thank you so much for being here tonight. Our next Know Your Ocean speaker series will be held on Wednesday, June 7th at 5:30 p.m. via Zoom. Again, these speaker series are sponsored and made possible with support from the County of Maui. The oysters in Maalaea Bay are still working hard to filter sediment out of the water column. We look forward to sharing that data with you as we continue checking them every other week. A single adult oyster can filter between 40 and 50 gallons of water per day, and you can adopt an oyster for just $7 to support our work in Maalaea. You can still participate in Earth Month through the end of this weekend, following up on our last Know Your Ocean presentation about citizen science opportunities on Maui. The City Nature Challenge will be happening on April 28th through May 1st. Download the iNaturalist app to your phone and use it to take pictures of wildlife or upload your photos directly to inaturalist.org. Observations of wildlife above and below the high tide line uploaded from April 28th through May 1st will automatically be added to Maui's observation tally for the event. You can learn more about this global BioBlitz event at citynaturechallenge.org. If you have missed some or all of tonight's presentation, you'll be able to view it on Facebook Live, as well as our Maui Nui Marine Resource Council Facebook page. It will also be posted to our YouTube channel, Maui Reefs. You can follow us on social media as well for any updates and news. You can also sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, Reef in Brief, that gives you links to all of these future webinars as well. And last but not least, we want to thank all of our sponsors and supporters who are making our work possible. And we also wish to thank individual donors and viewers like you. Mahalo for making a difference, and mahalo for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you all in June. Aloha.